Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited for today's episode. Before I introduce you to our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. It takes a great deal of boldness mixed with a vast deal of caution to acquire a great fortune. But then it takes 10 times as much wit to keep it after you have got it as it took you to make it. Amschel Rothschild. Our guest today, mentor, author, speaker, podcaster, owner, friend, Culture Matters podcast, automotive pundit,
Yeah, I like that.
steward of culture, and leader. Thanks for coming back to the Culture Matters podcast, Christopher Vester, today to talk about history, uh, legacy, family culture. When you hear this quote, I mean, that's a long one. I'm going to read it again. I want your thoughts on it. It takes a great deal of boldness mixed with a vast deal of caution to acquire a great fortune. But then it takes 10 times as much wit to keep it after you've got it as it took to make it.
I love that. So, what do I think of when I hear that?
Yeah.
In a situation where I'm second generation of a family business, um, what I've noticed in my study and as well as in reality in like with my family, founders are very bold. They step out in faith, they step out in their vision, they have this grand um some people would say like craziness about them to go out and try to create something. So that's the boldness. But they know when to pull back and when to be cautious. And that's what it takes to create, right? And then as they age, they lean more towards cautiousness because the acquisition of that has happened. The acquisition of wealth has happened. And it just says here it takes 10 times boldness and 10 times caution to keep it. Well, you have to have both sides of that equation. You can't stop being bold. There's been a balance of boldness and caution up to that point. And then I think as age happens, it becomes way more caution. So I think the 10 times of caution is probably the most prevalent thing. And when you read and study businesses and family businesses and things like that, that's what traditionally happens. Like we've made it, now don't lose it. Well, we made it by being bold and cautious. And we decide not to lose it by being overly cautious, 10 times cautious. And it's not balanced with 10 times boldness. That's what I see.
Hmm.
Great quote, though. They usually are good, though.
What do you think is part of the reason it takes 10 times more wit to keep?
Well, I mean, because the world's evolving, right? I mean, the whatever landscape you're in, no matter what the business, no matter what the industry, I mean, evolution happens in business and industry. Um, and there in every industry, there's always this J curve, right? There's always this. I mean, Henry Ford was the bottom of the J curve, and now we're elevating into heck, even how are we going to power our cars, and are we going to drive them, or is the brain of the car going to drive them? I mean, we're at a very high point of the J curve of our industry. Um, so the idea of what in the beginnings of any industry, like you got to be bold, but as that industry grows, you got to grow with it. So it's like and again, J curve, right? It just curves upward. You got to curve upward as well. So I think it's you know boldness. I think is thinking ahead of everyone,
Hmm.
and as you're in an industry, you got to keep thinking ahead. When the industry's grown, so you got to think head more. It's a lot of that, I think.
What have you come to understand it helps balance boldness and caution? What elements?
So I think I have a lack of caution. And being second generation, my father has grown in age to having maybe to some degree lack of boldness. And I think leaning on his mentorship and having conversations with him somewhere in between is the right answer. So I think it's by looking to the founding generation. That's in my experience. If I were first gen, I don't even know that that you're being 10 times more cautious and 10 times more bold. I think it's being in an industry, if you're of the mentality that you're going to be a founder, going to create business, you're going to do those things, like you've got that in you already. I don't know that you're aware of turning it up. I think results let you know which way you need to lean, whether you need to be more cautious and more bold. I mean, if you start falling behind your industry, then you need to be more bold, probably. But yeah, that's probably the $1 billion question, right? How do you know what the balance is? And I think culture probably gives you a clue. If you're starting to build a culture where people are excited about what you're creating, then it probably lets you know that you're being bold because people are seeing it. And then the cautiousness would be where are the results where are you not getting results? That's what you've got to be cautious around. So I think it's like studying the KPIs, like that's probably where you need to look. Are we too far ahead of the game? Are we just far enough ahead of the game? Yeah, I think that's it. Results, I think.
Let me see if I follow. Uh, a sign that boldness could be a part of the culture is people are excited.
Yeah.
And a sign that, yeah. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So because they see you as something different. I mean, if you think about the automotive space and you look around at any given particular dealership and the way they do business, the way they market, the way they advertise, to some degree, pretty cookie cutter. Like everybody's playing the same game. And when you step out in boldness and it excites people and people start to get drawn towards that, I think that lets you know that you're being bold because you stand out from the crowd. And then if you're looking at, okay, well, do I need to add in more cautiousness? I think you've got to look at the results of those things, the results of the boldness. Where is it headed? Yeah, so I think having an ear to the ground to see, are people excited about where we're headed? Because it lets you know you're ahead. And then are the results where they need to be? And lean on caution. Yeah.
Yeah, that's real smart. What role does family history play in the dynamic of this quote that we've read? What do you think?
Yeah, I think of course, I'm second generation, so I hear it as a second gen. My lens of life is second generation. Like my dad was bold and cautious to create what we've created. Now you've got to be 10 times as bold and 10 times as cautious to hold on to it. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to be bold, 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 but I got to be super cautious. Like So like the first part of that's a recognition of what the founder has created. And then the second half of that is a call to action to the second generation. If you want to keep it, grow it. It's going to take more than what. And there's another quote that kind of goes with that. What got you here won't get you there. I don't know if that's exactly the same. I mean, but it's the same idea. What got you to where you are now won't get you to where you want to go, unless where you are right now is as far as you want to go. And in any business space, I don't know of anybody that's as far as they want to go. There's always more. So yeah, it's that idea. Hey, this is what got us there, but where are we headed? And it's going to take more than what we've ever done before. More activity, more voice, more action. It's more, lots more. But if it's about the culture, then you got to really define the culture and figure out, okay, what is it about the culture that got us here? And then how do we pour gasoline on that part of it? Which should, over time, pour gasoline on the results.
What are some of your father's traits that you believe led to the boldness?
Wow, that's a great question, Jay, because some of his traits are like he's nose to the grindstone, right? That's typical to some degree of that generation. But I think if you look at business founders of that generation, they're even more to the ground. Like it's just that degree more, because he's always been a doer. And yeah, I think his ability to dive in and get it done, I'd say, is a big trait that got him there. His ability to build relationships well. I think you and I have talked about it, the idea of, the leader in any business does three things. It's relationships, reasons, and resources. He's really great at building relationships. He's really great at, I don't know about communicating reason, but finding reason. And then when it comes to resources, he's a great steward of resource. At least the financial side of resources. So when I look at those three areas of business growth, business development, business success, he did a great job of that. I think communicating reasons was probably, if anything, it's probably the only thing that was a weakness. And I'm not saying a weakness in that he couldn't do it. It was just a weakness in the ability to communicate it.
What about relationships have you learned from Hubert?
Oh my goodness, cultivate them. I think always showing up the same. I mean, he is. I mean, I say it. I think it's probably one of the things I admire most is he is a man of a very high level of integrity, and he's known as that. And the only way to cultivate that is to show up the same everywhere and live by your word and always honor your commitments. And I think that the end result of that is a lot of really good relationships, whether that be relationships inside the business or relationships with vendors or business partners. And he admits it now. If there was any relationships that he probably fell back on, it was internal and with family because he was so dedicated to the businesses. But building relationships in the business. He always showed up as the same guy. And that's whether when we were farming or when he was selling insurance or in the space we're in now. I think people that knew him as a farmer 50 years ago would say that he's the same person today. He's just working in a different field. So back then it was cultivating crops. Now it's cultivating customers. So it's just it's a different field of harvest, but it's still relational. I mean, I remember when I was a child working on the farm. I think the statute of limitations for child labor is gone, but when I was literally working in the fields, I mean, at 7, 8, 9 years old, I remember the relationship he had with the staff on the farm, because they drove an hour to come to work every morning, because they were, I mean, a county and a half away. And I mean, they're piling into cars to get to work and would be there before sunrise a lot of mornings. So they were up early, early, early. And we worked late in the day. And I know there was a lot of farms between us and them. But the whole time we were farming, we had the same exact crew from the same area. They worked like we do now. We have, long term employees in our dealerships, and it was the same then. I mean, there were plenty of places they could have worked, but they worked for us. And I think it's because of the way that Dad treated them. I think it was the relationship that he had with that crew. And you're talking about a man who was mid to late 20s. I mean, we stopped farming when I was 11. So he was only 31. So as a very young business owner, right, in the agricultural space, he kept the same staff. I think the only staff that we lost were people that passed. We had a older lady that passed while we were farming, but I can't think of a summer that went by that we didn't have the same people show up to come to work. So I think that's a forbearance of what we have now. I mean, when we've got people in the organization that have been with us 27, 26, 25, 20, 17, all the like long-term employees, well, it's because they've got relationship. They've built relationship.
What are some of the nuances of how you've watched the family keep these relationships over time?
I think it's it really does go back to when we were farming. The workers then were an extension of family. I mean, we were in the job with them. I mean, my mom was out there, my dad was out there, my grandfather was out there working with them, and it's no different now. I mean, every day we're here. We're in, I don't want to call it in the grind, because the grind makes it sound horrible, but we're in the day-to-day activities, encouraging success, encouraging growth. So I think it's the same. I think it's just the fact that we were there, present, not elevating ourselves above anyone in the organization. That's why Dad has such a hard time when we talk about, when when he is obtuse to the idea that when he walks in the room, people see him as something other than the man. I mean, that he wants them to see him the way he sees himself, which is just an average, ordinary, everyday guy. And because that's the only way he sees himself. and he just like, it's funny to him that anybody would see him as something different than that. But I think because of that people get comfortable and build relationship. And I mean, if you're looking for, I think, a culture of where people want to perform, it's because they don't want to let the owner down. And I went to a dealership years ago in Kentucky, and they have an incredibly high level of performance. And I did talk to the guy who was a second generation. He's second gen in the business. Talked to him some. I probably spent 3 hours with him, but the rest of my time was spent talking to the people that worked in his organization, trying to get a beat or a read on why they were there, because they were high performers, really high performers. And the answer that I got over and over and over again is, we don't want to let him down. We don't want to let him down. We don't want to, I mean, it was over and over and over again. Um, so he had built an amazing relationship with his employee base. So, if you ask me, the correlation, I think, was the question. I think it's the idea that we're just here too. I mean, it's just, hey, it's a career. We love what we do, but we're here with you.
What do you mean by finding reasons?
I think that is where the vision part of it is. Why and how, like, where are we going, right? And why are we going there? Like, what's the point of it? What's the reason behind it? And then how do we tie what we do every day to that one reason? That's how I see it, is being able to communicate a big enough reason that people want to take part. They want to build that. I think people have a very, a curated view of what automobile dealerships look like based on what they see in the media or in movies or in TV, and it's just about selling cars, ripping customers off, making money. There's this idea of who the automotive space is. And when we talk about our vision for things, we discuss hey, these are the results we want to achieve, but from those results, these are the things that we're going to do with it to impact our community, to impact the world. Like, it's like, if we want to fund mission trips and we want to fund things that are going on in the community where the first responders are involved with kids in the community, like letting people know that it is bigger than just selling and servicing a car. And the more we can communicate the reasons behind the activity that we're doing every day, what's the end result? What's the end goal? What's the big reason for doing it? And I think you just got to really communicate it often, because the more you communicate it, the more that people that want to be involved in that will want to come to work, and then they're going to want to be successful, because their success plays a part in the success of that ultimate mission. One of the things that is on our agenda this year is funding our very first company subsidized mission trip. We're trying to put that together in November this year. And a big part of the reason I want to do that is I do want to carry people to a place that I served in a few years ago, because it brought me back with a different mindset of what true service and servanthood look like, with no expectation of anything in return. And, I think oftentimes leaders get into this idea of, I'll serve, but there's an expectation of something in return. And in that particular setting, you're serving with no expectation of anything in return. And you can equate that back here. Again, leading to a reason. And maybe I've misinterpreted that, but to me, that's what it means, is giving the employee base and the customers, communicating with them of the ultimate reason of why we're doing business. Or maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how I see it. That's how reasons resonates in my brain.
What about where the family comes from? Do you think impacts the company today, like the history of the family?
So in some of the investigations we've been doing over the past couple of years, recognizing the fact that we come from retailers, we had never studied that deeply before, because we've always thought that my dad's side, my grandfather ran a general store. He was a retail person, you know, and he went over and above in customer service. Like that's the overwhelming thing about my grandfather Vester, granddaddy Vester, was that he owned this small country store and he was over and above customer service, over and above community. Like it was always this over and above. And he was successful enough to the point that I don't believe in retirement, but he decided to retire in his 40s. So, I mean, he had been pretty successful. And then on my mom's side, we always talked about the farming side of it because my grandfather and my uncles became very successful, and my uncles still are very successful farmers. And so that was kind of always where we thought, you know, that one side of our family's farmers, one side's from retail. And then we learned through the investigation of it that my grandfather, Granddaddy Rose, before he got into farming, was in the same exact space as my granddaddy Vester. He was part of owner in a small country store, retailing and delivering customer service. And now that we've discovered that, it's like, okay, well, how do we honor that part of our legacy in becoming retailers, although of a much different product? I mean, we're not selling Pepsi Colas or RC Colas in peanut bags. Right? We're selling a much different product, but we do have the ability to go above and beyond and be known for ridiculous customer and community service. And I think that now that that's been brought up and discovered, I think it helps us create legacy here and it helps us tell the story. Like, why is it so important that we show up good in the community and to the customer? Well, it's because historically our families have. And, you know, it's asking guys, how do they want to be remembered as they enter into the automotive space? Like, if this is going to be your career, how do you want to be remembered? If I wanted to be remembered as someone who went above and beyond in customer service and community service, then this would be the perfect home. So it does help create legacy, I think.
All these years later after inception, company still stands. What about Hubert from a value standpoint, would you say is the reason it still stands when so many of competitors have bowed out for one way or, you know, for one reason or another?
I think his care of the organization. I mean, he loves his family. Like if you look at first layer of the organization, family, but he also has a deep love and a deep care for the hundreds of families that work inside the organization. And like the idea of someone else caring for these families is scary. It's scary to me. And so I know it's scary to him, you know? I mean, because you'd be handing over the care of the families to some other entity that if they bought it. And that's, I mean, and maybe that's a horribly narcissistic way to look at it. Like you could do it better than anybody else. But the feedback is we do it well, you know? So like it would scare me to hand it over to someone who didn't know and love these people. And I think that's where dad's at. I would say like that's not an original thought for me. I think it's something I've definitely learned from observation.
Hmm.
So I mean that again, it goes back to when we were farming. I mean, I remember very distinctly. I don't remember the age. I want to say 7 or 8 years old. And in the farming community, you pay in cash. You know, lots of cash exchanged. I think the statutes of limitations have run out on that too. So, but lots of cash. And I remember as I was watching him pay, you know, we started having this discussion about money because like none of it was coming to me because I was out there putting in the hours. I'm like, okay, well, where's my little stack of dollar bills? I don't see it, you know? So, I mean, of course, inquisitive about that. And what he let me know is, hey, this is the way they're taking care of their family. They come here, they do work. I pay them and they take that home to take care of their family. Whether if there's one person here, how many people are in their home? Do they have a husband or a wife? Do they have children? And this is helping them take care of their home, their family. And what I do by owning all of this, by being the boss, quote unquote, the boss, is taking care of family. So I'm taking care of you. So you don't need the dollars because I got you. Right. That was kind of the mission or the lesson in that. But it made me, even at that age, think about how many people had to get taken care of by the amount of money on the table that they were picking. Because he wasn't talking about just the one person. He always related it back to their family.
Huh.
And if you look at the size of our company now, we have roughly 160 employees full time and almost 200 when you look at part time. Well, if you do that multiplication of one spouse and a couple of children, like it can add up to almost 1,000 people really, really quickly. And so it's not just the one people, it's just not that 160 employees, it's the families that are tied to the level of success or failure that we achieve as a business. So yeah, we care about the families. We care about our employees. We care about their level of success. And so the idea of somebody else doing that's scary because I don't know that anybody else had that conversation with their daddy when they were 8 years old. You know?
It takes a great deal of boldness mixed with a vast deal of caution to acquire a great fortune. But then it takes 10 times as much wit to keep it after you have got it as it took you to make it. What are some of the constructive elements of that father-son relationship that you could impart on our listeners that are in that have the opportunity to steward their families' histories?
Take the time to have the conversations. You know, huge amount of responsibility that's being transferred eventually. If that's the direction you want to go. So don't assume that level of responsibility from a transfer without understanding what took it to get it there, what it took to get it there. And you can only do that through conversation. We have become much more intentional about conversations in our family. And going into conversations with the intentions of learning, right? I think one of the things in the past 2 years that's developed in me is in the conversations, listening for the lessons. Because conversations can just be passed off as just a conversation. But there is a lesson to be learned in every conversation. And I don't know that that's something that I did 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I mean, I know I went into conversations looking to learn things, certain conversations, but I think it's the small, like off the cuff conversations that got overlooked. And I think now, because there's less, I'll call them off the cuff conversations, there's way more intentionality in the conversation. But because of that level of intentionality in those conversations, that the off the cuff have become more intentional, or at least I began to listen more intentionally. I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. So you asked, what would I tell somebody? Be intentional with the conversations and learn the lesson from every conversation, no matter how trivial. Like look for the lesson in every conversation. And you can only do that through asking questions and then listening to the answer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
To someone listening that wants to create a family legacy, is it worth it?
Abso-freaking-lutely. It's scary, right? When you start to think about what does 100 years from now look like. But the past 30 years have passed like a blink in the eye. So 100 years isn't that far away. So it's definitely worth it. Because it changes conversations you have with your children. And I'll say even, I think it's changed conversations that my father and mother have had with their grandchildren, because we've had so much intentionality behind looking to where we came from and thinking about where we're headed, that in the conversations, they just change, you know?
Wow.
We talk about all the time, the failure rate of family businesses is super, super high because the communication isn't there of how to own versus how to manage. And even recognizing the fact that that is a biblical thing. Like, you can go back and look directly to the word of God and it'll say, like, where they fail is always in the third generation. Then one generation decides they're going to do it the right way. And then by 3 more generations, they're failing again because of the lack of communication of vision and or truth. Let me say that. It's not vision in the word of God, it's the truth of the word of God. So it's the lack of communication of truth, which in a family conversation and legacy conversation, the best thing you can do is tell the truth. So the more clearly and more often and more intentionally you share the truth, then I think the likelihood of legacy and success multiplies exponentially.
The farther we look out as a family, the closer we come together in real time.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one, Jay. That's good.
If you're listening to this podcast, there's someone you care about, please share them this episode. Please leave a review on the Culture Matters podcast. Chris, where can we follow you?
The easiest place is Instagram. There and Facebook. There's all those other fancy places, but I don't ever go there. But Instagram, HV Auto COO, is how to find me on Instagram. And with Facebook, it's just my name, Christopher Vester.
In closing, what's your word for this episode?
Legacy. Yeah, that's the one word. If you're going to look back at this and think about history and what got created and what's being left to you to create, is legacy.
You're listening to this, please share this to someone you care about. Leave a review on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time.